Welcome to the Old Spice Boys podcast, where our penultimate guest in 2021 is the man who led Leeds United to the First Division title in 1992, the final season before the Premier League came into its gilded existence. He remains the last English manager, incredibly, to lift the trophy for finishing top of the 92 clubs. Howard Wilkinson has plenty of achievements to his name, not least as someone who, in their first full season as coach, masterminded the tactics and style which inspired three different clubs to the old First Division: Notts County, Sheffield Wednesday, and the aforementioned Leeds to earn promotion to the First Division. I'm John Richardson.
And I'm Neil Harmon. I first recall meeting Howard when he was introduced by County's former manager, Jimmy Cyril, to the press in his office at Meadow Lane. He looked a little sheepish to have been acclaimed by Cyril as a coach who was going places. And indeed he did, to Sheffield Wednesday, Leeds, and ultimately to England, where he was appointed as technical director of the FA in 1997 and was twice in caretaker control of the full England team when first Glenn Hoddle and then Kevin Keegan left the post. Howard also spent 3 years as manager of the under-21s. It was at his behest that as part of his blueprint for the future, the FA should build a national football centre where the best could learn from the best. He said it would take 20 years for the results to show. That was in 1997. And this year, England achieved their best result since the 1996 World Cup victory, reaching the final of the European Championships.
Howard, welcome to the Old Spice Boys. You're still heavily involved in the game as chairman of the League Managers Association, whose role in the game is somewhat overlooked. Has the role of the manager ever been placed under greater scrutiny than it is now?
No, it hasn't. And hence, I think, as we did think over 20 years ago, Graham Taylor and I, that our place at the decision-making table should be, if you like, a place that is given more credence than perhaps people think it should. Graham and I thought that decision-making processes as they related to the professional game, by just their very nature, should have input from the people who are responsible for team performances. I can't think of many people who would be more important in those sort of decisions. Not more important in terms of always being right, but more important in terms of they are the people who, first and foremost, have to deal with the decisions that are passed down. And they have to pass those decisions on to the players, be they good, bad, or indifferent decisions in the minds of the managers. So, yes, but we have made terrific progress over the years. We've had some terrific leaders. Richard Bevan now is probably one of the most influential people I've met in professional sport, in sense of his devotion to the task, his ability to go to bed at 2 and get up at 4. And if he's sitting around the table when there's a discussion taking place, you can be sure that he will make his views known and he will support those views with enormous confidence. So we have progressed a long way from those days when Graham and I dreamed of an association like this, and hopefully the progress that's been made will continue.
It seems incredible now, looking that you didn't have a United voice, 20 odd years ago. I mean, what were the sort of instances that made you and Graham get together, Howard? What was happening which was obviously annoying you or upsetting you?
I can think of one very, very good example, actually. It was Leeds United were playing Sheffield Wednesday away from home. We had a great result. I don't know whether it was 6 or 7. But I was sent to the stand by the decision of a linesman, really. We should have had a penalty. We didn't get the penalty. and I was booked because I'm alleged to have run up to the linesman and blah 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 blah. Anyway, I was adamant that that wasn't the case, and to cut a long story short, persuaded the FA for the first time ever to use video evidence. And that video evidence, which was carting a huge television into a room at the FA and using old videotape techniques, as it were, actually replay the incident, and clearly it shows that I didn't run 15 or 20 yards or whatever down the line. And because of that, that charge was dropped. But it was instances like that and going beyond that, decisions made relative to fixtures or kickoff times or anything that appertained to the game of professional football as it affected players, coaches and managers. We thought we should be at the table as important than anyone else around that table.
Because at that time, obviously, Howard, the Premier League was about 5 or 6 years old and was growing in popularity, and the demands on managers were growing at the same time. And it was vitally important, wasn't it, that you should be allowed to have a say as to what happened to your colleagues as the game grew and the money in it grew as well. It was just a kind of blossoming scenario.
Yeah, it was the 360-degree picture in the sense that, which we do now, as I say, Richard and CEOs before him and our staff, we've grown enormously. So we are now, we look after medical welfare, we look after mental welfare, we look after friends, family, we deal with difficult situations, people who are ill and maybe dying, as well as the more high-profile stuff, which is us representing our managers should the need arise in disciplinary hearings, etc., etc., etc. But now, compared with back then, we have unbelievable access to the decision-making process. Not that our access is necessarily rewarded with ears that always listen, but at least we have our say.
And you seem to do it with a kind of a quiet authority. You don't often see the LMA's work emblazoned in newspapers or talked about on the radio or television. You just seem to do a very professional job behind the scenes.
Yeah. Richard Bevan himself personifies how we prefer to operate. He's not... you don't see him frequently appearing on television or radio. He does appear when the occasion warrants it. But we now have far greater, I wouldn't say power, I'd say influence on people in the game in a 360-degree fashion.
What would be the biggest the in tray? What would have the most requests or pleas for help from the LMA? What's the biggest thing, do you think, the thing that you do most that most influences the game?
I couldn't accurately tell you that, but the one which has always been there, as you gentlemen will recognize and know and understand, is the relationship between a manager and the powers that be at a football club, particularly in terms of hiring and firing, and trying to ensure that when that happens, the manager is properly represented in any discussions, be they positive or negative, from his point of view. But I think probably as important or more important than that would be our support in terms of physical, mental, emotional support. Not just the manager, but the manager and his family.
Yeah.
Patience is in short supply in boardrooms, as you know, Howard. I mean, the number of sackings is just incredible. You know, some managers are only in a job 4 or 5 months and they're out. I mean, the situation appears to be getting worse and worse. Now, as the LMA, I know you support them financially, etc., with help. But where can you see this going? It just seems to be going off the map.
Some time ago, I did say that because I'm old enough to be able to say this. I said it's getting more like Hollywood every year, and by Hollywood I meant the old Hollywood of the 50s, with loads of money being thrown around, not always wisely. But reference to what you've just said, I in my role as a coach educator, if you like, one of the things I say, which I believe, that in order to create the correct relationship with your players, in order to get the best out of your players, you have to go into work every day believing that you're going to be at that club for the rest of your life, and yet at the same time accept that at the end of the day you may get the sack. Now, if sackings increase in terms of their regularity, you can see, if what I'm saying is true, that state of mind, which I think is essential if you're going to lead people. If you're going to lead people, they what you say has to be said with a view to the long term. You can't live from day to day in football, nor in any other walk of life, but particularly in football, you cannot. That don't work. Your position has got to be a position where the people you're dealing with, in terms of the group, us, not I, not me, we, then that's very difficult. It undermines your position if players start to think, which is just one of the consequences, if players start to think, I wonder. So the people above, I don't know whether they understand that or not, but if they do understand it, it clearly doesn't have the effect it should have on their decision-making processes, because at the end of each season, the figures tell you that tenure goes down and change of manager goes up in terms of numbers. So it is very difficult.
We had the owner of Wickham, Rob Couig, on the podcast last week, Howard, who just happens to have the longest serving manager in the Football League in Gareth Ainsworth. But he was saying, and as a newcomer to the game, what he can't get his head around is that clubs are allowed to become toys for rich people just to play with, and after 4 or 5 years, they lose like any kid, they lose interest in that toy and kind of throw it away. But at the same time, how much damage have they caused to managers along the way who they've scattered to the 4 winds on a whim? And you have to pick up the pieces or help pick up the pieces.
I think, yeah, I agree with that statement. But the reality is what we have to deal with.
Yeah.
And the reality is that statement, whatever words you use to describe that position, that's not going to change in a more positive way, I don't think. And which I think and thought right from the beginning, when I started managing, is it's not good for the game. If managers go to enormous trouble, one, in getting the education they require, and two, in dedicating themselves in terms of time and in terms of, if you like, emotional stress, etc., then if those above want those down there to do the best job they can, then those above should recognize that that the state of insecurity that mindset creates is an important factor, an important negative factor in terms of the manager's ability to get the best out of them.
Yeah. Can we perhaps go back just a bit and your process to get where you got in terms of your managerial career, Howard? I mentioned earlier about Jimmy Cyril, and I can almost see it now. You were slightly one pace behind him, and he said, "This is Howard Wilkinson, who's going to be going places." How much did you learn at Notts County and from Jimmy in particular, one of the great old characters of the game?
Number one, authenticity is a must. You have to be yourself. And if Jimmy was anything, it was that. He was himself. And because he represented himself honestly, people could deal with that. They could deal with the things he said and the mannerisms he had. But what also Jimmy was true to his word, because when I went to see him, I got a phone call and I went over to see him. I was actually at Loughborough taking an air license course with a group, and I took time out at lunchtime to go and see him on this phone call. And he said, I'll cut a long story short, and I won't try and imitate his accent, but he basically said, I want you to come and be my assistant here. And my answer was, no, Jimmy, I'm not coming here to carry a bag of balls around while you do the work. And he said to me, and again, cut it short, that will not be the case. Your responsibility will be working with the players, coaching them, picking the team, deciding what, and so on and so forth. So what we had was what is now quite common in football, where you have a director of football or whatever you want to call him. I mean, those days, Jimmy said, so some of the things he said were, and people won't recognize now. You won't have to deal with travel. You won't have to say whether we're going on a coach or a train or what, and you won't have to book it. The scouting, I realise now that driving up to Scotland and getting back at 6:30 in the morning, then jumping in the bath at the club, is not a good way. You're not giving your best chance to go out there and perform. So it was the ideal. I had managed before because I was a player manager at Boston United for 4 years. But this was the ideal entry into someone's first job, because he said to me, you concentrate on what you do best. Because I one of the questions, I said, well, how do you know me? He said, I know you. And we'd met on coaching courses at Lillishall in the summer, the managers and coaches courses. He would always be there. And I, as a young coach, would be there because I'd taken my A license very early on in my career, a bit like Graham Taylor. And Graham and I were acquaintances going back to school days, if you like. And Jimmy would always be at the manager and coaches courses. And then, of course, you'd see him around the game if you were at a game. And he was there won't be another Jimmy Cyril. No. He was unique. But he did what he said he'd do. And I don't know whether that's the time you're referring to, but we'd got a few games into the season. And he was doing the press conferences, and we were away at Leyton Orient. And he said, basically said, Howard, this was after the game, out of the blue, Howard, I think the time has come for you to, and he said a word that we won't repeat. We get up into the press room. I don't know whether you were there, but we get up into the press room, and he introduces me and said, direct your questions at me. Someone directs a question at me. I say about 3 sentences. This someone then jumps in before I finish. And without saying another word to them, Jimmy says to me, he gets hold of my hand and he says, come on, son, we're an expletive going home. So my first experience with the press lasted about 3 minutes. Because of him uttering as we go out the door, like, again, with another adjective before it, stupid question.
We've all been there.
We've had a few of them.
Yeah.
Oh dear. So you and that first season of full control, County were promoted to the old First Division, which must have been a real feather in your cap.
Yeah, well, when he said that, I decided, yeah, I'll come. And then again, this goes back to what I was talking to you about here, about going into work every day thinking you're going to be there the rest of your life, but knowing that any day you might not be. And Jimmy, I got the job in July. I went to the FA. Alan Wade said, no, your contract ends in December 30th. I said, okay. So I thought, that's it. So I ring Jimmy and I say, Jimmy, sorry, can't do this. Why? FA won't release me till the end of December. He said, I'll ring you back. About an hour later, I get a call. And then the chairman rings me. And the chairman said, is that right? You can't start till, so you think? And the chairman said, we didn't say when we want you. We just said, we want you. So you'll start on January 1st. So I had 6 months watching them not knowing I was watching them. So by the time I went in to do my first session, I'd already got a clear picture in my head of what we'd do the next season, because they were not in a very good position at that time. You know, they were flirting with mid to bottom of the table. So it gave me 6 months to ensure that when I went in June, because I extended pre-season to about 7 weeks, which was in those days like, what, 7 weeks? Most clubs did 4 at most.
Right.
But it gave me time to pick a team and work with a team, having seen what each individual does best, and then decided how best to get each of those individuals doing what they do best in a team that performs at its best.
Had you also decided to bring in players, Howard? Had you got a list of players that you wanted to add to your squad?
Yeah, but not in any, you know, no game-changing players. I saw weaknesses, but I looked at the team as I did at the players, as I did at the 3 clubs that I managed, and so we played to get out of that division. We played, as they call it, beautiful football today. Avramovic in goal was not allowed to kick the ball unless he had to. He had to throw it to people. We played with a sweeper. We had rotation, particularly at fullback and wide midfield. Don Masson would rotate with. Don Masson would drop into the back 4, and it became a back 5. But then Richards would come out, and we literally passed our way to success. And I remember we played an away friendly at Bristol City, and at full time, because that's how we played, and I think we drew 1-1. We were walking up the tunnel, and there was a Scottish midfield player at Bristol City, I won't name him, who finished up walking by the side of me. And again, I'll omit the expletive, but he said, basically said, you'll ... get relegated playing like that. But it was the only way for them to play. I mean, Pedro Richardson moved from fullback to sweeper, Don Masson in the team, Ray O'Brien at fullback, Benji at right back, a youngster, Brian Kilclean, a youngster, 18 years old, brought them into the team. Ian McCulloch today would be worth fortunes because he was a striker, but he could play anywhere. He could go anywhere, get the ball. He could run with it. He was quick. He was brave, and so on. So that was the way we had to play. If I was going to get them to perform at their best, I had to find a way for them to play which suited what it is they did best.
They obviously bought it.
It was different.
Sorry, Howard. They obviously bought into it. They enjoyed it, and the results followed.
Yeah, because the last week of pre-season, the players. I've got to be careful now. The players thought that the odds on us being promoted were very, very good. It was something crazy. And
I think the bookies had you at 66-1.
Correct. So
I've been doing my research.
If you were the wife of a player, you'd be allowed to have a bet at £5 or £10. It's a lot of money then.
Cool, yeah.
Especially if that 10 became 100 or something. But that's how confident they were that
Great.
This was, we like what we're doing, and by the way, our wives like it also because they want to have a collective. Yeah. But that tells you more about I think what a manager or a coach, how he can operate at his best is when what they are doing, they feel accommodates what they do best, even though each individual is different. And it annoys me when people talk about philosophy. My job as a coach is to get these players, find a way for them to go from the defending third to the attacking third, and then score goals. And I feel that what my job then is to do is, how do I arrange these players and how do I ask them to operate such that each of them is getting the opportunity to do what he does best. So I think it's a crime if someone says, this is how I like to play, so this is how we're going to play. I say, it's not about how you like to play. It's about finding a way for them to do what they do best. And that way then has to have a strategy that allows you to get into the attacking third, because unless you're getting in there and you're getting the ball in there, you're never going to win a football match. And so now I see some games where I watch and I think they play like Manchester City defending third, they play like Manchester City middle third, but they get in the attacking third and they can't play like Manchester City because they haven't got the players with the technique, the skill, and the to manipulate the ball and do things and make the sort of passes under pressure that they do make, etc. But there you are. I'm holding past it.
No, not at all, Howard. And that's a good point. I mean, you look at teams now in the Premier League, seems to be a fashion to play out from the back. Now, as you know, some can and some can't. But it does appear to be a fashion that everybody should follow it, irrespective of whether they can do it or not.
Yeah, it becomes. There was a game at Ellen Road earlier in the season, Leeds United 2, Man City 1. And at the end of the game, the experts waxed lyrical about the tactics of Leeds and how they outsmarted out, blah, 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 blah. Not once during that conversation did anyone refer to the stats. And the stats at the end of the game were Leeds United 3 strikes, I think 3 on target. I think it was Man City 27 strikes, 11 on target. I think. I might be 1 or 2 wrong or right. Now, if all I gave you now was those stats and asked you who won that game, A or B, then you go 27 strikes, 11 on target. Got to be them. But we all know that football is a sport which is perhaps where chance plays perhaps the biggest part of any, considering all the sports. You know, and there's plenty of research being done on that now to show that if you're going to football management, then don't go in if you get depressed and you think that the world is against you because you're unlucky, because you're going to be unlucky a lot.
I don't want to overlook Sheffield Wednesday, because obviously you had a good time there. I'm sure we'll reflect on it. That was when you won the title with Leeds. I was going through the files yesterday. You had a squad of 35, of which 27 were from England. I mean, that just can't happen these days, can it? It never will again. I mean, will a club almost chock-a-block full with English players win the Premier League?
No, but the good thing now is that we are producing for clubs. That at clubs we're producing English players, who are showing themselves to be good enough to play in first teams. That's the good thing, and I think that will increase because success breeds success, and I think managers now going into club, particularly at the top clubs, where you're seeing more consistency, more time being allowed, and you're seeing more English players. But let's not talk about English players, just talk about players coming from academies. And I think the development now has improved dramatically, and I think it's continuing to improve. So, but whether that will dramatically impact, it will impact in the Premier League, but whether it will dramatically, because the amounts of money now around are allowing more than a few clubs to go looking not just for the best in England, Britain, but the best in the world.
But that was the fundamental element of when you reviewed the game, Howard, when you came into the Football Association as technical director. I think I'm right in saying that one of your main thrusts was to kind of build an English replica of the French model. And it probably took a long time to get that through to people, not knowing how the FA operated. But to see what you're seeing now and what you've just said about the quality of English players coming through must do your heart good.
Yeah, absolutely. When I joined Leeds, so a quick example, when I joined Leeds, there were 18 apprentices there. I think from that group that I'm talking about, only one finished up being signed by Leeds, 1 in 18. And that was not uncommon. And they were called apprentices. My view was, and which I managed to start to implement at Leeds, was that there was not enough teaching going on. in a round sort of way. What do I mean by that? Well, apprentices would come in. Sometimes they'd have to clean boots. Sometimes they help with ground staff and so on and so forth. And they were called apprentices. And I thought, well, there's more to becoming an elite athlete than that, than just being able to perform. You can't train to be an Olympic 400-meter runner to win a gold medal and, as it were, just be someone who can run. There's lots of other things that have to be dealt with in achieving that sort of elite performance. And we need coaches now, if you like, to recognize that a better word would be teachers. That they've got more than just the football aspect to deal with in terms of this individual, this youngster, recognizing that he needs to take and should be taking ownership for his performance, and understanding that and understanding what goes with that. And through that, not only will his performances improve, but, and I think this is happening as well, you'll start to recognize that things like diet, lifestyle, also actually comes into their head. Now, you know, when I was playing and far after that, all you thought was football, diet, lifestyle, alcohol. What's that got to do with me playing on Saturday? But more than that, those are two easy examples, but it's about more than that. Taking ownership. It is just ensuring that you are in a place to make the most out of what it is you've got.
We don't want to leave Leeds behind because there's magnificent achievement, Howard. He's still the last Englishman to win the championship. You talk about diets, etc., etc. You had a player there that did realise that, didn't he? Gordon Strachan. He seemed to be ahead of his time on things like that.
Yeah. When I met Gordon and then he joined us, we were like-minded. But he did say to me afterwards, when we met each other, he said, you know, he did say, you said one thing, you said, I can make you fitter than you are now. And he said, I thought, no, that's wrong. You can't make me fitter than I am now. I'm fit as I'll ever be. And he said, I was fitter. And that's because he in that respect had a very open mind and, you know, listened and go, yeah, okay, right, all right, I'll have some of that. The worst I can do is play longer than I might play if I don't do that. But yeah, and it's important when you're in a situation where you're in charge of a group, whether that's in a factory or in the forces or whatever, that you want one, because you can get one, you can then get two.
Yeah.
You want people who represent what it is you're trying to get them to do and think like, because they're important. Because you will also have in a group, you'll have the terrorist, and the terrorist, as we all know, loves company. So yeah, they're always there to say, how we do. If you said that to me, I'm telling you, and put their arm around him, and because, you know, terrorist on his own is, but if you can get one or two with him, he feels he's succeeding. So having the Strachans, and they don't have to be Strachans. Gary Speed was a leader from being. I told him when he was 19. I said, "You'll eventually be a captain," and he blushed and now I said, "Well, because you turn up early, you leave the ground late, and when you're on the pitch, it's you're playing for us, not for you, and that you'll become a role model in that sense. And that's important that you have people like that. And by the time Gary left, I think, not picked him, but I think he'd played in every position in the team, apart from goal. You know, I might play in wide midfield, start off wide midfield and move him more central. Or on occasions when we needed it, I'd move him further up the front. He's played left back and so on. So that sort of person is very important because they represent what it is you want to see, and it's a better message if they're giving the message. If Gordon Strachan's giving the message to another player, it's a better way to deliver the message than to have me say it. And on top of which, you then got reinforcement for your views within the group.
There's a magnificent side, though, that you built. It was one of experience and also youth. How did you build it? I mean, you brought in certain players, obviously, you wanted, but did you have that sort of template in your mind all the time, Howard? Or...
Well, I was lucky because when I said yes to Leslie Silver, there was second bottom of the league, I think, the second division. And the reason I left his office that night, having said yes, was because, and honestly, this happened. It will never happen again. By the time we'd had 6 meetings, I'd gone through what you'd need to do over the next 10 years to be the top team in Britain and stay there. And it was a very comprehensive discussion because I also mentioned at that time the thought that one of the things a good club will be a good, it was called Centre of Excellence then, it's now called an academy, and that already in my mind, I had this idea of as it were, a school. So when we built the new training ground, we had accommodation built and we were bringing the boys in at 14. And we had a link with the local secondary school. So they were getting more coaching, but at the same time, that was being combined with school. So school wasn't losing out. But that group, I think of when they played in the Champions League semi-final, I think there were about 10 of them on the team sheet. And all of them had come into the club as decent players, but finished up excellent players. And that's, I think, part of the reason that I was approached by the FA through a friend, and by that I mean a friend who I got to know through my work with the FA, with Robin Russell, whose dad was a manager. And Robin was a very, very, very shrewd thinker in terms of the game and the future of the game and how you might build structures and so on. So, yeah, I think had Leslie not had the bad experience they had, him and his wife, when they were burgled violently, and that really knocked the stuffing out of him. I think if he'd have been around for longer, I'd have been there for much longer, because he was if you had a chairman or a leader at a football club like that now, you'd be very, very, he was just unbelievable. And given his background, which was third generation immigrant, Jewish immigrant, fought in the Second World War in Lancaster bombers, came out of the RAF, borrowed some money, started mixing paint in a garage. And when I sat down with him, he got a business worth 75 million at a paint factory. So it was, you had that sort of person, if you said to me, "What do you think would be the?" and I'd say, "Well, you need something like Leslie Silver." What do you mean? Well, benevolent, modest, but shrewd decision maker who will weigh up what it is you're saying, and then basically not say to you, "I don't think that's a good idea or a bad idea." He'll say to you, "Yeah, we can afford that. We can't. So do it if we can." But that's not the sort of relationship you see too often.
No. Also, it does seem incredible that you are the last Englishman to win the major championship. Obviously, we've got loads of foreign managers, but it still seems incredible that is a hard fact.
Well, it's a pity or a shame or whatever, but I don't lose sleep over it. I mean, it's a fact. We have got some very good English managers, but you need opportunities.
Yeah.
And the English managers or the British managers tend not to get the best jobs. It's funny because now when coaches, or if I'm talking to coaches, particularly British coaches or whatever, the stats for first-time managers are horrendous. They're horrendous. If you get the sack before you've got 75 games under your belt at one club, your first club, after 5 years, an enormous percentage of those people are no longer in the game. So when coaches talk to me about, I say to them, "Listen, you're not going to like what I'm going to say because you've got a wife and 3 kids or whatever. But if I were you, I'd go and start in Scandinavia. I'd go and start in Scandinavia. I can give you 5 or 6 good examples who've gone there over the years with no reputation, got a job, and that's given them the opportunity to be at a club for longer than you get here. And whilst that's happening, they're learning. And you never know. One day you might, if you do it that way, you might finish up England manager."
There's an example of Graham Potter there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Who's done very well at Brighton, and he's been talked about as maybe a future England manager. So that confirms what you're saying, Howard.
Yeah. You know, depends on your ability or your reputation, but there's that for me. If you're looking for the safest way to try and, as it were, get your credentials to get yourself a better job, then there are examples where that has happened.
So are you saying that it's like a killing fields, that you have your first job, you're sacked, and then you go off into the ether, never to be seen again?
Yeah. Look, I don't want to depress myself, so I don't chat. But if I make a phone call now to the office, they'll give you they'll give me the latest stats that were done on first-time managers, and that statistic has not changed in a positive manner. It may have stayed horizontal, but it is a fact. Yeah.
Also, okay, if a top Premier League manager loses a job, he's well financed, isn't he? Well supported, thanks to the efforts of the LMA, etc.
Yes.
But a first-time manager, say in League Two, he's going to leave with virtually nothing, isn't he? And that's his career, sort of washed up before it even started.
Yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted, but it is a person needs to think about how badly he wants to do that job. And he has to think about, how do I start, if I get the opportunity, with the best possible chance of being successful?
Is that about picking the right club?
Oh, absolutely. No, it's not about picking the right club. It's about picking the right owner or chairman.
Of course, I know what you were saying about, and what Rico was saying about League Two, but I suspect in the Championship, where I mean, it's the need or the drive, the desire to get into the Premier League and the riches just causes people to lose their minds, doesn't it? And you're right, Howard. The owners, some can cope, some have a calm demeanour, some just go nuts when they think they can't make it. And we've got to do something now. We've got to do something now, and that isn't always the way to build a prosperous club.
No, if I were an owner, I think I'd be very keen. Two things matter for me. One, picking the right person. So that means I've got to know what matters, because being successful in business, building a successful business, doesn't mean you're going to be a good football chairman. It's a help, but it doesn't mean making those sort of decisions. You're because of that, you're going to be right. So it's going into it. There's two things that matter: is if that person seriously thinks about it, then he needs to recognize what matters, and then he needs to recognize that the selection of the person who's going to be, in brackets, in inverted commas, the manager or coach, has what the qualities required to be successful. Given he knows, once we decide on what we're going to do, we are going to do it, or we are going to be responsible for repairing it if it breaks down. And that's got to be better. I mean, that works in a factory. If you turn up at 7 a.m. in a factory knowing that the place is run well and that in the current climate this guy's not going to panic and so on and so forth, and if he treats you fairly and well, if there's an illness in your family or whatever, it's a better place to work. And I think that helps you, if performer.
If you were the owner of an ordinary business and you sacked 5 managing directors in the space of 2 years, people would look at you, wouldn't they? But in football, that seems to be accepted. A chairman can sack 5 managers in 2 years and he's still there. It's his club, I suppose, but it just seems incredulous.
Yeah. Like I said, do they? I don't think they understand that very simple fact that if the person in charge is going to be as well prepared to get the best out of that dressing room as is possible, that person has to, in order to get his ideas across, work as if I'm going to be here for the next 10 years. Because I've got to have that attitude to convince them of what it is I'm doing, saying, etc. And for that to happen, the person above him has to recognize the importance of that, but also has to prepare himself better. What is it I'm looking for?
Yeah. Well, Manchester United did that, didn't they, with Alex Ferguson? Because we all know he struggled early on, but Martin Edwards, etc., had faith in him, and we've seen the results since.
Yeah. But the numbers are so huge now. I think I've said it. I did say some time ago, around about 2010, I think, that I see Hollywood. I see an ordinary actor being paid unbelievable amounts, not because he's the right actor for the part, but because he's deemed to be, or she's deemed to be, or deemed to have certain attributes which people are will pay to look at.
It's not quite Hollywood, but you did bring Eric Cantona into the British game, Howard. It certainly stirred a few there, and he was a bit of a matinee idol, wasn't he, in his way? What was the? Can you just recount those days and bringing him in and how that happened?
Lee Chapman got an injury at Tottenham away, and we were well placed, first or second in the Championship, and he
Can't get the stuff.
That's probably him, probably Eric.
Hello,
Eric.
Shall I start again?
No.
Yes, you were. Lee Chapman was injured at Fulham.
Yeah, I went to hospital. We got him in hospital up in Leeds. I went up there on the Sunday morning. His face was a mess. He'd gone on the track head first, skin peeling off the forehead, nose, etc. Surgeon said, I said, how long will that? He said, 7, 8, 9 weeks. Jesus Christ. So 2 things happened. One, there's a boxing coach in Sheffield who produced a few champions and continued to produce them. I rang him and said, can you come and have a look at something? Because I know you guys are brilliant in that 2 minutes you get, a minute you get, at fixing a cut and God knows what, sitting in the corner. Anyway, cut a long story short, he produced a liquid. I picked it up, gave it to Lee and said, you've got to bathe yourself with that on the hour until you've used it all. In the meantime, I'd rung up a few people about Eric. I'll start again. In the meantime, I rung a few people about Eric.
Good job this isn't live.
Yeah. Including Platini, Gerard Houllier, and a couple of players. And they gave me a brief potted history that he'd had 10 clubs, I think, and wasn't playing at that time because I think I'm not sure, but I think he'd had a difference of opinion with somebody sitting on a football incident, whatever it was, he'd been booked, and I think he'd slapped somebody. So all said the same thing. Brilliant, absolutely unbelievable player, but shall we say he has his moments when he can be difficult, hence the number of clubs he's had. Anyway, I got him over on loan with an agreement to buy him for whatever, 1.3 million, I think, on a date in late April or I'm trying to remember. Anyway, we were playing at home. We're up there at the top of the table towards the end of the season, and he scores a wonder goal. And it's the day before we've got to ring up and tell the club whether we're going to take it or not. And the chairman whacks me in the ribs with his elbow because I was in the stand and says, That's just cost me £1.3 million that goal, because the crowd were going crazy. And that's how that's the story of that recruitment. That he'd come on as a sub, by the way, because by that time Chappie was fit again. And Chappie, whenever I'd had Lee Chapman, he'd always got me 20 goals or 20 plus. Yeah. And so I think he came on in about 7 games that season. So we started the season with Eric as a player with us. And it didn't go as well as it might have gone.
Was that off the field as well as on, Howard?
No, not really.
Did you find him hard to handle then?
The problem was that he didn't. We played a few games where decisions or orders, not orders, but what we'd said we needed to do didn't get done. I remember Watford away up in Glasgow in the first leg of the Champions League game against Rangers, where on 2 set pieces defending, we concede a goal and players are looking around like, well, what was supposed to, and so on. And we were then due to play away in London. We did a bit of training on the Saturday morning, which we always did. I told him the team at the start of that session. We then had a lunch, and then we had a meeting, brief meeting after lunch. And Gary Mike said, Eric's gone, he's left. I said, where's he gone? He said, I don't know, but he's left, he's left the room. And that was him back in France. So that's the story, is it?
So was it? Sorry, go on.
Go on.
So was it then inevitable that he was going to leave? We know where he went and how it happened. So when you saw what happened at Manchester United, where obviously he was idolised, did you think, I wish he'd stayed, or were you happy with
No,
decision?
Because if you take out the clubs he'd had in France and he had Leeds to that, clearly at Man United he's found his niche.
Yeah.
And then after that we can talk for hours about, well, why? What was the difference? And there were many differences, but life can be like that.
Well, as we know, Howard, in fairness, Alex had his moments with him, didn't he?
Yeah. I took Vinnie Jones and not had one problem with Vinnie. None of the stories that it was as if we'd got a changed man. Players loved him in the dressing room. As far as a clubman was concerned, he was unbelievable. Some of the things he did that were left unsaid. Visiting a youngster that we went to see one Saturday morning who was in a wheelchair and who was very, very ill, and making, as it were, anonymous appearances at that house just to visit that lad and give his mum a break. That's what he'd do sometimes, he'd give his mum a break. So these things happen. And that's Vinny, and we got promoted and he played a huge part in it, but I by then signed Gary McAllister, And our first away game, our first game of the season was away at Everton in the first division. And we're on the bus, and I get on the bus last at Ellen Road. And I'm sitting at the table, just not the front seat, but nearly the front seat. And I feel this thing in the back of my head. And I turn round, and it's Eric with his 12 bore pointed in the back of my head, saying something like, "Do you want to change your mind, Gaffer?"
You meant Vinny rather than
Vinny,
Eric.
yeah.
Sorry, Vinny. Yeah, Vinny. It was Vinny. Vinny. I'll say that again. I feel this thing in the back of my head, and I turn around and it's Vinny, and he's got the 12 ball. And he said, that's what he said. Thought you might want to change your mind.
Great. The things that happened on team coaches that never get
But
to the press.
he, you know, we went out that day. We won away at Everton, and it was John, a player at Leeds when I joined Leeds, who I'd known at Sheffield Wednesday. Afterwards, when we met once, John said to me, "You know, one of the big things at Leeds that was different to any other club I've ever been at." I said, "What was that?" He said, the subs were as enthusiastic about the game and respectful of the game as the people who were playing. I said, yeah. He said, "I'm telling you, I've never seen that anywhere else, where the subs, as it were, wanted the person or people who've taken their place to do well." Because of this, you know.
Well, you know you've got a chance then, Howard, don't you?
Yeah. Dave Sexton was wonderful. He had loads of little sayings, but you know, one of his favourites was, "It's amazing what we can achieve if nobody minds who gets the credit." And that was true of that dressing room. That, in fact, you know, the club, within the club, there was an understanding of what we were doing and a desire to play your part. And sometimes playing your part might not be as attractive as you might think. And Gary Speed was the epitome of that ethos. Like, I could yell out, "Tell Speed, I can go and play in central midfield." You know, he might be having a blinder out there on the left, but if there was 10 minutes to go you wouldn't get.
Yeah.
You'd just go and do it.
Yeah.
You know.
It was a fantastic team, one of the best in my era.
Yeah.
So many congrats.
Well, yeah, but we played differently. We played. Notts County played different. Sheffield Wednesday played different to Leeds United. Leeds United played different to Leeds United, in the sense that in season 1, when we got promoted, we were playing in a certain way. If you watched us, by the time we got to season 2 in the first division, we were playing in some respects, very different way. But that was only because there were different players. It wasn't, "I like to play this way," because it's not about how I like to play. It's about how can I get them to play in a manner which enables us to win more games than we might do if we tried to play in a different way, which some people call good football.
Can I ask you, rounding up, about the current Leeds United side? I mean, last season under Bielsa, they took the Premier League by storm. Now they're having problems, you know, beating 7-0, as we know, at Manchester City. The season hasn't gone well for them. I know they've had injuries, but can you see why it's gone down a level?
I think that when these days, when you get promoted into the Premier League, and I can't think of anybody in the Championship now who could do any different to this. When you get promoted into that Premier League, and you look at the team, the managers who've, as it were, managed to survive, they've managed to survive by playing in a manner which has been trying not to lose. You know, I can think of Burnley, where a great example of a manager who says, "I've got to be realistic here. We need that many points." But good managers are no different anyway. When people talk about targets, what's your target for next season? Well, my target would always be, having looked at the results for the last 10 years and recognised that the highest point total to get relegated was X, then I'd say our target, before we start thinking about anything else, is X. Once we've got that number of points under our belt, then we'll look at the next objective. But not until then. And everybody must realise that. And that sort of, when we got to the last 4 games to win the league, we got thrashed at Man City, well beaten. And I got them in after thinking about it on the all day Sunday and what we were going to do. I looked at our fixtures and I got them all in, and I said, the next 4 games, I'm going to play the same team for every game. If I can, that's barring injuries, except one game, and there'll be one change in that game. And the next morning, Gordon came in the office, knocked on the door about 8 o'clock and said, and I know what the change is going to be in the game against Liverpool. Me. I won't be playing. And I said, yeah, you're right. You won't be playing. And I started to say, and he said, don't give me any bullshit about. He said, I know why. Because I said, if we can win those 3 games and draw at Liverpool, that for me is a realistic target. It's an achievable target, and it's a target which might just cause Manchester United a problem. So all we need, and then we can say we did our very, very best, is to get those 3 results and that draw. And then that's it. You know, we've had a great season. So that's, I think sometimes there are times when you have to say, this is what we're going to do. But football being what it is, you can't ever that. And the older you get, the more you see it, that look, you've got to be able to deal with what some people call bad luck. Well, in football, it's not bad luck, because experts show, statisticians tell you now that if you're a manager playing at the top level and you've managed more than 250 games, you will not win 40% of the stats of the games. Stats say you should win. That doesn't mean you will lose them, but you won't win them. And it's because of that, the fact that in terms of skills, football demands the most open of skills. You can play the ball with any part of your body but your arm and your hand. You can play the ball through 360 degrees. You can run with it, dribble it, pass it. It can be raining. It can be wind blowing. So contrast that with snooker.
Yeah,
those are the 2 direct ends of the continuum.
Brilliant.
Except in snooker, you haven't got a referee as well.
Well, you have, but all he does is call the scores, really.
Yeah.
That's wonderful, Howard.
Howard, brilliant.
It's been great having you and seeing you and
Looking so well
fine,
as well.
You're looking fine, Fettel, but then again, you always did.
Like us.
Bullshit baffles brains.
This is what that's why we got away with it for so long.
Exactly.
And, wish you a Merry Christmas, Howard, and many more years serving the managers of the country.
Thanks for your time, Howard. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
I hope you're going to edit it. That
we will. Don't worry.
I don't know if it's been switched on.
No, we will. Don't worry. We're just going to do our outlines and
edit the thing. The whole thing.
Don't worry.
Okay.
We will.
Cheers, Howard.
Thanks, Howard.
Take care.
You too.
Thanks to Howard for agreeing to appear on the Old Spice Boys podcast, which was produced and edited by Sam Sethi.
We'll be back next week with our final edition of the year to celebrate Christmas in a very special way. In the meantime, you can find us on Spotify, Amazon and Apple at oldspiceboys.football and on Twitter at the Old Spice Boys. See you soon.